I never liked hospitals. There's something about them that makes me feel small. Maybe it's the smell, too clean, like everything's been wiped down too many times. Or maybe it's the quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts sound too loud. People always say hospitals are places of healing, but to me, they've always felt like waiting rooms for bad news. I sat in the lobby with my hands in my lap, twisting my fingers together like I used to do when I was a kid. The chair was cold. The air smelled like bleach. A soft voice called out names every few minutes, and I kept looking up, thinking maybe they'd forgotten about me. It was just a checkup, nothing serious. I kept telling myself that. But still, my foot tapped the floor in a nervous rhythm I couldn't stop. My chest felt tight, like my body knew something I didn't. I hadn't been to a doctor in a long time, not since I moved out here. Not since everything changed. I tried to distract myself. I watched the fish in the little tank across the room, moving in slow circles behind the glass. They seemed calm, unbothered. I wished I could feel that way. Then, the door opened. A nurse stepped out and called my name. I stood up too fast. My legs felt stiff from sitting too long, and I gave a little awkward wave as I followed her down the hallway. She didn't say much, just asked me to step on the scale, took my blood pressure, then led me to an exam room with a soft smile. "Dr. Eli will be with you soon," she said, and then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her and I was alone again. I sat on the exam table, the paper crinkling under me. I hated that sound. It always made me feel like I didn't belong here. Like I was just another number in a line of people pretending they were fine. I looked around the room. Everything was white and pale grey, even the cabinets. There was a little poster on the wall with a smiling heart cartoon, telling me to take care of your ticker. I stared at it for too long, just so I wouldn't have to look at the mirror on the door. I didn't want to see my own face. Minutes passed. My heart beat too loud in my chest. I thought about leaving. I thought about standing up, walking out, saying forget it, I'm fine. But then the door opened again, and in walked someone who didn't look like any doctor I'd ever seen. He wasn't wearing a stiff white coat, just a light blue button-up, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. His eyes were soft, kind, and when he smiled, it wasn't fake. It was like he saw me. Not the chart, not the number, me. "Hi," he said gently, holding out his hand. "I'm Dr. Eli, thanks for waiting." His voice was calm, steady, like warm tea on a cold morning. I took his hand. It was warm, firm but not too tight. "Hey," I replied, quietly. "Nice to meet you." And just like that, something shifted. I didn't know what it was. I just knew the air felt different now. Dr. Eli sat down across from me, not behind the desk, but in the chair next to the little counter. It felt less like a doctor's office and more like a conversation waiting to happen. He held a small tablet in his hand, tapping gently as he glanced at my name. "So, what brings you in today?" he asked. His voice had that soft edge again, like he wasn't rushing, like he actually wanted to know. I shrugged. "Just routine stuff. It's been a while since my last checkup." He nodded like he understood. No judgment. Just a quiet, "Okay," and a few more taps on the screen. I watched him as he worked, his eyes scanning the notes, then flicking up to meet mine every few moments. His eyes were a light brown, almost golden under the ceiling light. They were the kind of eyes that didn't just look at you, but looked into you. He asked a few simple questions about allergies, past surgeries, family history. I answered each one, my voice steadier than I expected. He made it easy. Nothing felt too clinical. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush. And I noticed things, small things. The way he rolled his sleeves just above his elbows, the soft hair on his forearms, the quiet way he clicked his pen against his palm, not nervously, just thoughtfully. The faint scent of soap on his skin, clean but warm, not sharp like hospital air. His smile was the kind people don't practice. It just happened. When he listened to my heartbeat, I froze a little, not because I was nervous about the test, but because he was close. I could feel the warmth of him, the way the fabric of his shirt brushed my arm as he leaned in. His stethoscope was cold, but his hands were gentle. "Sorry," he murmured, noticing the way I tensed. "Always forget how cold this thing gets." I gave a quiet laugh. "It's okay. I wasn't ready for it, that's all." He smiled again, just slightly. But it lingered, and when he pulled back, his hand touched my shoulder, just for a second. Maybe to steady me, maybe to say you're good. After the physical exam, he leaned back in his chair and tapped a few more notes. "Everything looks fine so far," he said. "You seem healthy?" "That's good to hear," I replied, trying not to look too relieved. But he didn't move on. He tilted his head, like he was reading something invisible. "Are you sleeping okay?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. It wasn't on the form. It wasn't standard. "I guess," I said. "Some nights are better than others." He nodded. "Any stress lately?" That one made me pause. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were picking at the hem of my sleeve. I didn't answer right away, and he didn't push. "Sorry," I said. "That's kind of a big question." He smiled softly. "That's okay. You don't have to answer. I just try to check in on more than numbers." That stayed with me. More than numbers. Something about the way he said it. It made me feel like I mattered. Not as a patient, not as a form, but as a person. When the appointment ended, he stood and walked me to the door himself. That was another, small thing. Doctors usually stayed behind desks. But Eli walked with me, one hand in his pocket, the other gently resting on the door handle. "If anything changes, or if you just want to talk things out, feel free to schedule another visit," he said. I nodded. "Thanks. I might do that." Our eyes met again. There was nothing flirty about it, no hidden meanings, just something steady, warm. Then he smiled one more time. "Take care, okay?" "Yeah," I said, stepping into the hallway. "You too." As I walked away, I felt the silence of the hospital again, but it didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Something about Dr. Eli stayed with me. His voice, his eyes. That small moment when he looked right at me, like I was seen, really seen. And I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew I wanted to feel it again. It had been a couple of weeks since the checkup, but I found myself thinking about it more than I wanted to admit. Not the results, not the medical stuff, just him. Dr. Eli. There was something about the way he made things feel lighter, even when nothing in my life had really changed. I'd been feeling stuck for a long time, tired all the time, dragging myself through the days like everything was grey. But after that visit, the grey didn't feel so heavy. It was still there, just softer. So when the clinic sent a message, reminding me I had the option to schedule a follow-up if needed, I hesitated for about a day. Then I booked it. Maybe it was for my health. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't care. I just knew I wanted to see him again. When I walked into the room this time, he smiled like he remembered me. "You came back," he said, almost like he wasn't expecting it. I shrugged, trying to act casual. "Just figured it wouldn't hurt. To check in." He nodded and gestured for me to sit. "It's good to see you again." There was a pause after that, a soft one. I sat down on the edge of the table again. He pulled over the little stool and rolled it close. Not too close, but enough that I could smell that same warm, clean scent from before. His soap, probably. Something gentle, something real. "How have you been sleeping?" he asked. I gave a small laugh. "Still not great." He tilted his head, studying my face. "Nightmares?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly just overthinking." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that can be louder than any dream." His voice was low, calm, The kind of voice that made you want to tell the truth, even if you hadn't planned on it. We talked about small things at first: food, exercise, daily habits. But then he asked, "Are you feeling lonely lately?" I looked at him, really looked. No one had asked me that before. Not like that. I didn't answer right away. The room felt quiet, like it was waiting with me. His eyes didn't rush me. They just stayed steady, open. "Yeah," I said finally. "I guess I am." Another pause, this one longer. He nodded, not like he pitied me, but like he understood, like he knew the shape of that feeling too. We didn't say much after that for a few seconds, and then I asked something I wasn't planning to. "Do you ever feel that way?" He looked surprised, but not in a bad way. "Sometimes," he said quietly. "More often than I used to. Even with people around you all day." He gave a soft laugh. "That's not the kind of company that fills you up." I smiled a little at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. I felt that way too. "Do you ever talk to your patients like this?" I asked him. He leaned back slightly in his chair, thoughtful. "Not usually, but sometimes. Someone walks in and it just feels different. Feels like a real conversation instead of a checklist." He didn't look away when he said it. Neither did I. Something about the room felt warmer. Or maybe it was just us. He reached behind him for a pen, then handed it to me to sign a small form. Our fingers brushed just for a second. But it was enough to feel like time slowed down. I wrote my name, handed it back. Our eyes met again. "Thanks for coming in," he said softly, his voice a little lower now. "Thanks for listening," I replied. I meant it. On the walk home, I kept hearing the way he said my name, the way he paused before answering personal questions, the way his voice dropped just a little when things got real. There was something in the air now, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not love, not yet, but maybe the start of it, or maybe just the hope. And that was enough for now. I hadn't planned on coming back again so soon. But a week later, I was sitting in the waiting room once more. It wasn't even for anything important, just a follow-up on some blood work, routine stuff. That's what I told myself. Still, I checked my reflection in the glass door before going in, ran a hand through my hair, smoothed my shirt. My heart thudded quietly, not with fear this time, but with something else, something softer, like the feeling right before music starts. When he opened the door and called my name, I stood up too fast. "Hey," he said, with a gentle smile, stepping aside to let me walk ahead of him. His voice still had that calmness I remembered, that unspoken warmth, like it already knew you and liked you anyway. We went through the usual motions: blood pressure, pulse, a few notes on his tablet. But the room felt different now. The space between us felt like it carried something invisible, something unspoken, but not heavy, just present. "How have things been?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "A little better." He nodded. "That's good to hear." "But still tired," I added, honest. His eyes softened. "I can see that." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful, like we were both trying to listen to something deeper inside the quiet. Then, to my surprise, he spoke again, but this time about himself. My mum used to tell me the body holds stories, not just sickness, not just pain, but everything we carry. I looked at him. That sounds like something a therapist would say. He smiled. She was, actually. There was a beat of silence. Something shifted inside me. "You miss her?" I asked, gently. He nodded once, his eyes looking past me, just for a second. "Every day." I wanted to say something comforting, but I didn't know how. So instead, I just said, "Thanks for sharing that with me." His eyes met mine again, and this time, something happened. He looked at me, not as a patient, not as someone checking off boxes, but like he was really seeing me, all of me, even the parts I hadn't said out loud. I felt my breath catch. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, not just interest, not just kindness, but recognition, like he knew me, or wanted to, maybe both. He looked away first, clearing his throat lightly. "Your labs are normal, by the way. Everything's fine." I nodded, but I barely heard the words. I was still in that moment. That look, I didn't imagine it. I know I didn't, and maybe he felt it too. When the appointment ended, I sat for a moment longer, pretending to tie my shoe. I didn't want to leave just yet. The room felt warmer than the hallway, than the world. Eli noticed, but he didn't rush me. Instead, he leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed gently, watching me like he was trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. I stood up finally and walked toward him. "Thanks again," I said, softer than I meant to. He nodded. "You know, you can come in any time. You don't have to wait for a test result." That made my chest ache in a way I didn't expect. I smiled. "Yeah, I might do that." There was a pause. One of those long ones that could either turn into goodbye or something else. He opened the door and I stepped out into the hallway. But before I walked too far, I looked back, and he was still watching me, just like before. Only this time, his eyes didn't look away. I walked home in silence. The city noise felt distant, like I was underwater or dreaming. I kept thinking about that look, that brief moment when the space between us got quiet and something passed through it. Something wordless, but real. I'd never felt anything like it before, and it scared me a little, because maybe I was falling for someone I wasn't supposed to fall for. A doctor, a stranger, a quiet man with soft eyes and a calm voice. But the truth was, I already had. Just a little, just enough to notice. And now I couldn't unnotice it. I couldn't stop wondering what he saw when he looked at me like that. Maybe he saw someone tired but still trying. Maybe he saw someone who needed to be asked, "Are you okay?" and not rushed to answer. Maybe he saw someone like himself. And maybe I saw him too, the real him. And maybe that was the beginning of something. I didn't know yet, but I wanted to. More than I'd wanted anything in a long time. The walk home felt longer than usual. I don't know if it was the cold wind brushing against my jacket or the silence buzzing in my ears, but something about that day clung to me like static. I kept replaying the way Eli had looked at me, the pause before he opened the door, the way his arms had folded, not defensive, but like he was holding something quiet inside himself. I wanted to say something before I left, something more, but I didn't. I couldn't find the words. They felt like butterflies fluttering in my chest, soft but nervous, too scared to leave. That night, I sat on my bed, still wearing my jacket. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat there, staring at my hands. It had only been 3 visits. Maybe 4 if I counted the one where I dropped off some forms. Barely anything, really. Not enough for a story. But when I thought of him, I didn't just remember the clinic. I remembered how he listened, how his eyes didn't rush me, how his voice got softer when he talked about his mum, and how, for just a moment, it felt like we weren't doctor and patient at all. We were just 2 people sitting in a quiet room. I thought about the little things, like how he always rolled his sleeves up, neatly, evenly, like a habit, like it mattered to him, like how his pen tapped the edge of his clipboard when he was thinking, or how he always looked directly at me when he asked, "How have you really been?" That really always stayed with me, like he was reaching past the usual answers and waiting for the truth. It scared me, how much I remembered. It scared me even more that I wanted him to remember too. The next morning, I walked past a small cafe on the corner. The windows were fogged, and people sat inside with warm cups in their hands, their cheeks red from the cold. I imagined what it would be like to sit there with him, not saying much, just sharing the same air. Maybe we'd talk about books or music, or nothing at all. Maybe our knees would brush under the table and we wouldn't move them. That thought sat in my chest all day, like a pebble at the bottom of a river. Later that evening, I picked up the pen he had handed me during our last visit. It was still in my bag. Just a cheap blue click pen. Nothing special. But when I held it, I remembered the way our fingers touched. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even long. But it happened. And I felt it. That small, electric moment when skin meets skin and something shifts. He didn't pull away fast, neither did I. And that said more than either of us did out loud. There was so much I didn't say that day. I didn't say, "I feel safe when I'm here." I didn't say, "Your voice makes me feel like I matter." I didn't say, "I think about you when I don't want to think about anyone." I didn't even ask him if he felt it too. Maybe I was scared to know, or maybe I already did. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the heater, the creak of the pipes, familiar sounds that didn't feel comforting anymore. I wished I had said something, just one thing, even something small. Like, "Do you want to grab a coffee sometime?" Or, "You don't seem like just a doctor to me." But I hadn't, and now I didn't know when I'd see him again. Still, something in me had changed, because the silence between us wasn't empty. It was waiting. It held all the things I hadn't said, and maybe the things he hadn't either. I didn't know where this would go. I didn't even know if it would go anywhere. But for the first time in a long while, I wanted it to, and that meant something. That meant everything. I hadn't planned on going back. Not yet. But I kept waking up tired, even after a full night's sleep. My shoulders ached, and my chest felt heavy, like I was carrying something invisible and important. I told myself I'd go in just to rule things out. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I just needed vitamins, or a better pillow. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't there for my body. I was there for something I couldn't explain. The clinic was quiet that morning. The waiting room was half empty. Soft music played from the speakers, some kind of piano, instrumental that almost made the silence feel cozy. When Eli walked out to call my name, I looked up, and he looked surprised, not unhappy, just surprised, like he hadn't expected to see me again so soon. But his voice was the same, low, warm, familiar. "Hey," he said gently, "come on back." In the room I sat down, fingers twisting together in my lap. He pulled up his chair and opened my chart. "You look tired," he said softly. I gave a small laugh. "That obvious, huh?" He nodded once. "Yeah, more than last time." I looked at him for a second, then away. "It's just been a lot." He didn't ask for details right away. He didn't fill the air with solutions. He just waited, and after a few seconds I said it. "I've been feeling alone." The words slipped out before I could soften them. But once they were there, I didn't want to take them back. His face didn't change much, but his eyes did. They got gentler, deeper. "Tell me more," he said. I told him about the way the silence at home echoed too loudly sometimes, about how the walls felt too close at night, about how I missed something, but I didn't know what. He listened. No interruptions, no rushed sympathy, just him, sitting there like a lighthouse in the fog. When I paused, he leaned forward slightly. "I know that feeling," he said quietly. I looked at him. "You do," he nodded, more than I'd like to admit. There was something raw in his voice, like he wasn't used to saying things like that. Like it cost him something, but he gave it anyway. For a while, neither of us said anything. And then he reached over to hand me a tissue from the desk. I hadn't realized my eyes were glossy until that moment. When our hands met, something different happened. His fingers touched mine. Not fast, not by accident. They paused, just long enough. Just enough to mean something. And this time, I didn't pull away. Neither did he. I felt the warmth of his skin against mine, the softness of the moment, the weight of it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even bold. But it was real. It was someone saying, without words, I see you. You're not alone, right? Now, and for the first time in a long time, I believed it. When he finally let go, it was gentle, like he didn't want to break the moment too fast. He cleared his throat quietly and looked down at his clipboard, pretending to check something. But I could tell his mind was somewhere else. So was mine. Before I left, he said, "Take care of yourself, okay?" I nodded, voice soft. "I'll try." Then a pause. "Thank you," I said. I meant it. He looked up and held my gaze. Anytime, and I knew he meant it too. As I walked down the hallway, I didn't feel better exactly, but I felt different. Lighter, seen touched. Not just physically, but in a way that reached deeper. And when I stepped outside into the cold air, I realized something. I wasn't tired because of my body. I was tired from holding everything in, and maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to anymore. Not with him, not with someone who listened without fixing, not with someone who held my hand just long enough to say, "I'm here." I lingered. The appointment was over. My coat was on, my bag was over my shoulder, but I didn't walk out. Instead, I stood near the door, fingers lightly brushing the handle, like I was waiting for something else. A reason to stay. A sign Eli noticed. Of course he did. He looked up from his desk, his pen still in hand, paused mid-note. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was soft, like the question wasn't meant to be clinical. It was personal. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I don't know." He smiled gently and stood. "Want me to walk you out?" We walked side by side down the hallway. The clinic was quiet at this hour. Most of the staff had left already, and only a faint buzzing sound came from the vending machine in the break room as we passed. Neither of us spoke right away. I didn't want to ruin it with small talk. It felt like any words would be too sharp, too loud for the soft air between us. When we reached the elevator, I pressed the button but didn't step closer. He stood beside me, hands in his pockets, looking ahead. Not at the floor, not at his watch. Just ahead. Like he was waiting too. I turned slightly toward him. "I keep thinking about last time," I said quietly. "What I told you, about feeling alone." He didn't move, but I felt him listening. "I don't say things like that easily." "I know," he said. That was all. Just 2 words. But they felt heavy in a good way, like they came from someone who wasn't just hearing me, but holding what I said. And then he added, "You didn't sound weak. You sounded honest." That made my throat tighten, because no one had ever told me that before. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I didn't step in. Neither did he. A pause. A long one. My heart was loud. Not in an exciting movie-style way, just in the way that happens when you're too aware of someone beside you. I turned my head, just enough to see him. He was already looking at me, not in the way a doctor looks at a patient, not in a way that asked for anything, just looked. Like he was trying to see everything at once, and remember it. I wanted to ask something. I didn't even know what. Maybe, "Do you think about me when I'm not here?" Maybe, "Is this more than kindness?" Or maybe just, "Is it okay if I don't leave yet?" But I couldn't speak, and neither could he. So we stood there in the hallway, the elevator doors still open, the world waiting, the moment holding us both like it didn't want to let go. Finally, he broke the silence, but not with words. Just a small breath, and then he nodded toward the open doors. I I should get back to my notes, he said, quiet, almost regretful. I nodded too. Right. Yeah, of course. But my hand didn't move to press the button. Instead, I looked up at him one last time. I'm glad I came today, I said. He gave the faintest smile, the kind that barely lifts the corners of the mouth but says everything. I'm glad too. I stepped into the elevator and the doors began to close. He didn't turn away. Not until the doors shut fully between us, and even then, I kept staring at the closed space as if I could still feel his presence there. The ride down was short, but it felt stretched and slow. I wasn't sad, but I wasn't okay either. It was something in between. Something you feel when you want something and almost have it, but not quite. Like reaching out for a light just beyond your fingers. Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was something else. Something that had started with a soft look and stayed behind my ribs. I walked home slower than usual, and even when I made it to my apartment, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights flicker and the trees move. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I'd see him again soon. But I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't wanted to leave. It started with rain, not the kind that comes and goes. This one stayed. A slow, steady downpour that made the whole world feel like it was wrapped in a grey blanket. I hadn't planned to go out, but something inside me wouldn't stay still. My thoughts had been loud all day, circling, tugging, looping back to that moment in the hallway. The way Eli looked at me, like he was holding something back. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't even have an excuse. But I grabbed my coat anyway, and I walked. By the time I reached the clinic, I was soaked. My hood had slipped halfway down, my jeans clung to my legs, and my shoes made a quiet squish with every step. The building looked darker than usual. I almost turned around. Maybe he wasn't even there. Maybe this was a mistake. But then I saw one light still on inside. His office. I stood at the front desk for a moment, unsure. Then I knocked gently against the glass window, not loud, just enough. A few seconds later, Eli appeared around the corner. He looked surprised at first, then concerned. He came to the door and opened it without a word. I stood there dripping, my hands deep in my pockets. "Hi," I said softly. "Hi," he replied, his voice warm even through the chill in the air. "Come in." The clinic was empty, quiet, just the soft ticking of a wall clock and the sound of rain tapping on the windows. He led me back to his office without asking anything. "Take your coat off," he said gently. "You're soaked." I did. He took it from me and hung it on a hook behind the door. Then he handed me a clean towel from a drawer and motioned for me to sit on the small couch near the wall. I sat. He made tea. When he brought the mug over, his hands brushed mine again. This time, I let my fingers stay there a moment longer than necessary. He noticed, but didn't say anything. He just sat down across from me in the desk chair, cradling his own cup, and looked at me with quiet eyes. I stared into the steam rising, from the mug, then back at him. "I don't really know why I came," I admitted. Eli didn't smile, but his face softened. "I think you do," he said. The silence between us was warm, safe, not the kind that presses on your chest, the kind that makes you want to tell the truth. So I did. "I feel like I've been walking around with a weight inside me," I said slowly. "Something I haven't let anyone see. Something I didn't think anyone would even care about." He nodded, saying nothing. "But when I'm here," I continued, "I feel lighter. Like maybe I'm not the only one carrying things." Eli looked down at his cup. "You're not," he said quietly. There it was again, his honesty. So gentle, so rare. I set my tea down and leaned back slightly on the couch. He looked up at me then, and I could tell he was choosing whether to speak, and then he did. When I was younger, he began, I thought I had to hide every soft part of me to be taken seriously, especially in this job. People expect doctors to be strong, always calm, always certain. He took a breath. But sometimes, all I want is for someone to see me when I'm not any of those things. I didn't answer. With words, I just looked at him, really looked, and I think he felt it. The rain outside got louder, like it was applauding something we hadn't yet said. Eli stood and walked over to the couch, not fast, not dramatic, just sure. He sat beside me, our arms just barely touching. I'm glad you came tonight, he said. I wasn't sure if I should, I replied. I'm glad you did anyway. We sat like that for a while. No talk of exams, or forms, or symptoms. Just two people, in the soft light of a quiet office, listening to rain and feeling seen. Then I did something I hadn't let myself do before. I reached for his hand, slowly, carefully, and he didn't pull away. He met me there, his fingers slipping between mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. We held on, not tight, just enough. Enough to say, I'm here, I see you, you're not alone. In that small office on that rainy night, something changed. Nothing big, nothing loud, just a touch that meant everything. Just a hand in mine that made the whole world feel quiet. The rain had slowed by the time I realized how long we'd been sitting there. His hand was still in mine, warm and steady. Neither of us had spoken in minutes, but it didn't feel like silence. It felt like something was being said without words, something real, something neither of us wanted to break. Eli shifted slightly, just enough to turn and face me. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckle. That was all. A small movement, but it made my heart flutter in that way where you know, deep down, that something gentle and rare is unfolding. I don't usually do this, he said quietly. He didn't need to explain what this meant. I understood. I gave a soft laugh. Yeah, me neither. We looked at each other then. Really looked. No fear, no guessing. Just the kind of quiet honesty that made everything else fade away. The moment held its breath. And then, slowly, softly, he leaned in. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't loud or breathless or full of sparks. It was warm. Still. His forehead rested against mine before anything else, like he was asking without asking. And I closed the space between us. Just enough, our lips touched, barely, gently, as if the kiss itself was a question. And when I kissed him back, it was my answer. Yes. A quiet yes. A gentle yes. Not a yes to everything, not a promise for forever, but a yes to right now, to this closeness, this feeling, this truth. When we pulled back, we didn't say anything. There was nothing to explain, just the sound of the rain outside, just his breath, warm on my cheek. We stayed close for a few more seconds, foreheads touching again, eyes closed. I felt calm for the first time in a long time, like the noise inside me had finally gone still. Eventually, Eli stood and walked me to the door. He handed me my coat and smiled. A different kind of smile now. Softer, brighter, a little unsure, but not afraid. Looked at him, memorizing everything about the moment, the dim light behind him, the tea mug still on the desk, the smell of rain still on my skin. I'll see you soon? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. You better, he said with a quiet grin. I stepped out into the hallway, turned back just once, and he was still there, watching me leave. Not like before. This time he knew I'd come back. I still think about that night, about the rain and the tea, and the way his hand felt in mine. Steady, real, like it had been waiting for me. I think about how close I came to not going, to staying in bed, to telling myself it was nothing. Because, for a long time, I told myself not to hope, not to feel too much, not to be too soft. But Eli, he made room for softness. He didn't ask me to be anything more or less than I was. And maybe that's why I stayed. Not because he was perfect, but because he was present, kind, quietly brave. Sometimes we think love needs to be loud to matter, full of big gestures and fast declarations. But the best parts, the ones that stay with you, are often the quiet ones. A hand brushing yours, a voice saying, "You look tired," and meaning it. A pause that lasts just long enough for you to feel seen. I don't know what will happen next. We didn't make promises. There's no music playing behind us, no dramatic ending, just this quiet thing between us that feels like the start of something. And maybe that's enough, more than enough. I'm still learning how to stay when things get real, how to let someone in, how to believe I'm worth being seen. But that night, I stayed, and he did too. So now I ask you, would you have stayed? If someone looked at you, not with hunger but with care, would you have let them? If someone sat beside you in the quiet and offered their hand, would you have reached back? Would you have shown up in the rain? Would you have kissed them first or waited? I don't know what your answer is, but I hope one day you find your soft yes, your gentle, quiet. You don't have to hide any more kind of love, because it's out there, and when it comes, I hope you stay.